My parents invested in my brother because I was unpromising. 3 years later, they begged me for $380,000. Growing up in suburban Pennsylvania, I always knew something was off about my place in our family. It wasn't anything dramatic or movie-worthy, just this constant feeling that I was somehow less important than my brother Michael. Our house was nice enough, a 4-bedroom colonial in a decent school district that my parents had stretched themselves thin to afford. Dad worked as a regional manager for an office supply chain, and Mom taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school. We weren't rich, but we weren't struggling either. Just your typical middle-class American family, except for the not-so-subtle favoritism. Michael was 3 years older than me, and from my earliest memories, he was the golden child, the favorite, the chosen one. I didn't have words for it back then, but looking back now, it's painfully obvious. When I was 7, I remember sitting at the top of the stairs after bedtime, listening to my parents talk in the living room. They didn't know I was there, and I heard Mom say something that stuck with me for years. Michael has that special something. He's going to be somebody important someday. Dad agreed, adding that they needed to invest in his future. I didn't fully understand what that meant then, but I would learn soon enough. For my 8th birthday, I got a used bike from the neighbor's garage sale. Not that I was ungrateful. I loved that bike and rode it everywhere. But 2 months later, when Michael turned 11, he got a brand new mountain bike from the fancy store across town. I remember watching him unwrap it, his face lighting up while Dad clapped him on the shoulder saying, "Only the best for our future CEO." Mom took dozens of photos while I just stood there holding the plate with birthday cake. That was the pattern throughout our childhood. Michael got private baseball coaching. I got a worn glove and told to practice in the backyard. He got a new computer for his schoolwork. I inherited his old one when it started running too slow for him. When he started high school, they redecorated his room with new furniture. Mine kept the same kitty wallpaper until I was 15 and finally tore it down myself. Don't get me wrong, my parents weren't monsters. They fed me, clothed me, took me to the doctor when I was sick. But there was always this unspoken understanding that Michael was a family investment, and I was, well, maintenance cost. I overheard more conversations over the years, snippets about Michael's potential and how not everyone is cut out for greatness. Once, when I was 12, I heard my dad tell my mom, "Look, we can't afford to give both boys everything. We have to make choices. Michael has a real shot at something big. We need to focus our resources." I tried not to let it get to me. I worked hard in school, joined the track team because it required minimal equipment, and got decent grades. Not straight A's like Michael, but solid B's with the occasional A-. I had a small group of good friends, and we spent most weekends hanging out at the mall or playing video games at whoever's house had the newest console, never mine. The summer before Michael's senior year, my parents took him on a college tour road trip, visiting 7 prestigious universities across the Northeast. I stayed home with my grandmother. When they returned, dinner conversations revolved around nothing but application strategies, essay topics, and which school had the best business program. That's when I first started to worry about my own future. By the time I hit my junior year of high school, Michael was a sophomore at Cornell, studying business with a minor in economics. My parents had taken out second mortgage to help cover what his scholarship didn't. Every phone call with him was put on speaker. Every minor accomplishment celebrated like he'd cured cancer. Meanwhile, I was starting to think about my own college prospects. I had decent SAT scores, and my guidance counselor said I had a shot at some state schools. Maybe even a scholarship if I could bump my GPA up a bit more. I started researching programs in computer science. I'd always been good with technology, often fixing the family computers when they acted up. One night at dinner, I finally brought it up. "So, I've been looking at Penn State and Pitt for next year. Ms. Larson thinks I might qualify for partial scholarships." The silence that followed was deafening. My parents exchanged one of those looks, the kind that parents think kids can't interpret. But we absolutely can. Dad cleared his throat. "About that, we need to have a conversation about college plans." Mom jumped in, her voice overly cheerful. "Have you considered community college the first 2 years? It's so much more affordable. But you guys didn't make Michael go to community college, I pointed out. Another look between them. The situation was different then, Dad said. And frankly, Michael's academic record opened doors that yours hasn't, Mom finished. I stared at them. My GPA is 3.6. Michael's was 3.8. It's not that different. Dad put down his fork. Look, we've invested everything in your brother's education. The second mortgage, our savings, everything. He's in an Ivy League school, and that's not cheap, even with a scholarship. The truth is, we made a bet on your brother, and we just don't have the resources to do the same for you right now. There it was. The truth I'd always known, but had never heard stated so bluntly. They'd made a bet on Michael, not on me. So what am I supposed to do? I asked. Get a job, Dad said. Save up. Apply for every scholarship you can find. Maybe take night classes while you work. Plenty of successful people put themselves through school. I nodded slowly, pushing mashed potatoes around my plate. That night, I applied for jobs at every restaurant, store, and warehouse within biking distance of our house. By the end of the week, I had a position bussing tables at Applebee's and another stocking shelves at the local grocery store on weekends. My senior year would be school, work, sleep, repeat. For 6 months, I followed that brutal schedule. My grades slipped a little, but I managed to save almost $3,000. Nowhere near enough for college, but it was a start. I applied to state schools and filled out every scholarship form I could find, hoping for enough financial aid to make it work. Meanwhile, Michael came home for spring break, full of stories about networking events and internship offers. Dad bought him a new suit for interviews. Mom helped him prepare by conducting mock interviews at the dining room table, while I ate quick meals before rushing off to work. The defining moment came on a Saturday in April. I just finished a double shift at Applebee's and was dead on my feet, pulling into our driveway in my rusty hand-me-down Ford pickup, a vehicle my parents had reluctantly given me when they decided Michael needed something better for college. There, gleaming in the driveway, was a brand new Jeep Grand Cherokee with a giant red bow on top. Michael was standing beside it, beaming while our parents took photos. They hadn't even told me they were planning this. I sat in my battered pickup, with its mismatched door and the duct tape holding part of the dashboard together, watching Michael show off his new ride to his friends who had gathered for the surprise. It was a perfect metaphor for our lives, him with everything shiny and new, me with the leftovers and scraps. Something snapped inside me. I got out of my truck and walked straight up to them. Are you kidding me? I asked, my voice shaking. A new Jeep? Why, you're telling me there's no money to help a community college. My father's face darkened. This isn't the time or place for this discussion. When is the time? After I've worked myself to death trying to save enough for school, while you're buying luxury SUVs? Michael looked uncomfortable. Hey, man, come on. Don't. Hey, Mammy, I shot back. You've known about this your whole life. The golden child. The chosen one. Did you ever once say, hey, what about my brother? My mother stepped between us. That's enough. Michael earned this. His grades, his internship offer. And what have I earned? I asked, what would it take for you to invest in me like you've invested in him? Dad grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the house. Inside, now. Once the door closed behind us, he turned on me. How dare you ruin your brother's moment? After everything we've done for you. I laughed, a hollow sound. Everything you've done for me? Like what exactly? Give me all the hand-me-downs? Make me work 2 jobs while he gets a brand new car. You have no idea the sacrifices we've made for this family, Mom said, her voice tight. For this family? Or for Michael? I countered. Dad's face was red now. That's it. I won't have this kind of disrespect in my house. If you can't appreciate what you have, maybe you should go figure things out on your own for a while. I stared at him, not quite believing what I was hearing. Are you kicking me out? Mom's face softened slightly, but her words didn't. Maybe some time on your own would help you understand that the world doesn't owe you anything, that you need to work for what you want instead of being jealous of your brother. I've been working 2 jobs all year. I shouted. Dad pointed to the door. Out! Don't come back until you've learned to appreciate what you have instead of being bitter about what you don't. I stood there, stunned. In the driveway, I could still hear Michael and his friends admiring the new Jeep, their laughter floating through the windows. Fine, I said finally, my voice hollow. I'll go. I went to my room and stuffed some clothes and essentials into a duffel bag. As I walked back to the living room, my mother couldn't quite meet my eyes. You can call us when you've had some time to think about your attitude, she said. Dad just stood with his arms crossed, watching me silently. I walked out the door, past Michael and his shiny new Jeep, past a life where I was always second best. I tossed my bag into my battered pickup truck and started the engine, which coughed twice before catching. As I pulled away from the only home I'd ever known, I had no idea where I was going. All I knew was that everything had changed in an instant, and that the family I thought I had no longer existed. I drove aimlessly that night, my truck rumbling beneath me like it might give up at any moment, much like my family had. The digital clock on my cracked dashboard read 11:37 p.m. when I finally pulled into a Walmart parking lot. I'd heard somewhere that they let people sleep in their cars overnight. Pushing the seat back as far as it would go, I tried to get comfortable, which was about as successful as trying to sleep on a pile of rocks. Those first 3 nights in my pickup taught me more about life than 18 years in my parents' house ever did. The first morning, I woke up with my neck cramped so badly I could barely turn my head. By day, I'd hang out at the library, using their free Wi-Fi to look for affordable places to rent and apply for more jobs. At night, I'd return to a different parking lot, never staying in the same place twice. I was afraid of being recognized as homeless, even though technically I was just between living situations, as I kept telling myself. On day 4, I withdrew nearly all my savings from the ATM. $3,000 that was supposed to be for college now had to cover first month's rent, security deposit, and basic necessities. Amazing how quickly life plans can change when your support system vanishes overnight. The apartment I found was in a part of town my mother would have locked the car doors while driving through. The building manager, a man named Ray with yellow-stained fingers and a permanent smell of cigarettes, showed me the studio apartment with the enthusiasm of someone watching paint dry. Utilities included, except electric, he mumbled, flicking a light switch that revealed a room about the size of my parents' walk-in closet. No parties, no pets, no smoking inside. The irony of the last rule wasn't lost on me, considering he'd been flicking ash on the carpet throughout the tour. But I was desperate, and at $650 a month, it was the only place I could afford. I'll take it, I said, trying to sound confident rather than defeated. The next day, I moved in with my duffel bag of clothes, a second-hand mattress I'd found on Facebook Marketplace for $40, and a camping chair I'd purchased from Target. Home sweet home. My new roommates introduced themselves that first night, an entire family of cockroaches that scattered when I turned on the bathroom light. The biggest one, which I named Bob, seemed unafraid, just staring at me from the edge of the sink as if to say, "I was here first, kid." "At least you're consistent, Bob," I told the roach a few days later. That's more than I can say for my actual family. Bob seemed to be the only constant presence in my life at that point. With rent secured for first month, I focused on building up more hours at work. My Applebee's manager took pity on me and gave me extra shifts. I also picked up a third job unloading trucks at a warehouse from 4 a.m. to 8 a.m. 3 days a week. Between all 3 jobs, I was working nearly 70 hours weekly. My routine became mechanical. Warehouse job until morning, sleep until afternoon, grocery store shift, then straight to Applebee's until closing. On days without the warehouse job, I get almost 6 hours of sleep, a luxury. My body ached constantly. My hands developed calluses I'd never had before. The skin around my fingernails cracked and sometimes bled from the constant washing and chemical cleaning products. One particularly exhausting night, after a 12-hour shift at Applebee's covering for a sick coworker, I collapsed onto my mattress, too tired to even shower off the smell of deep fryer oil and barbecue sauce that had become my permanent cologne. But despite my exhaustion, sleep wouldn't come. My mind kept racing with calculations: rent, electricity, food, gas for my increasingly unreliable truck, and the pitiful amount left for my virtually abandoned college fund. At this rate, I'd be middle-aged before I could afford a semester at community college. The realization hit me hard. Maybe my parents were right. Maybe Michael did deserve their investment more than I did. He probably wouldn't have ended up in a roach motel working 3 dead-end jobs. In my sleepless delirium, I grabbed my phone and mindlessly scrolled through YouTube, looking for anything to distract me from my reality. That's when an automated recommendation appeared. I made $5,000 from one abandoned storage unit. The thumbnail showed a guy standing next to a pile of boxes with an exaggerated, shocked expression. Normally, I'd have scrolled past such obvious clickbait, but at 3 a.m. with nothing better to do, I tapped the video. The guy, a self-proclaimed reselling entrepreneur named Travis, documented how he bought an abandoned storage unit at auction for $900 and found collectibles, electronics, and furniture that he flipped for over $5,000. I watched, initially skeptical but increasingly intrigued, as Travis explained the concept. When people stop paying for their storage units, the content get auctioned off to the highest bidder. The buyers can't go inside beforehand. Just peek from the entrance when the doors rolled up. It's basically gambling, but with potentially valuable stuff instead of cards. By the time dawn broke, I'd fallen down a rabbit hole of storage auction videos. Some showed incredible finds, vintage video games worth thousands, antique furniture, even a unit with a safe containing jewelry. Others showed complete busts, units full of trash, damaged goods, or just ordinary household items worth less than the bid. What struck me wasn't just the potential money, but the sense of discovery, the mystery of what might be inside those rolled-up doors. It felt like a treasure hunt for adults, and something about it awakened a part of me that had been dormant during my weeks of mindless work and survival. Later that day, running on 2 hours of sleep and too much coffee, I searched for storage auctions in my area. To my surprise, there was one happening that weekend just 20 miles away. The listing showed 5 units up for auction, with a minimum bid of $50 each. I consider my finances. After setting aside money for next month's rent and bare necessities, I had about $900 left. If I spent it on a storage unit and found nothing valuable, I'd be setting myself back significantly. But if I found something worth selling, the risk was enormous. But for the first time since leaving home, I felt a spark of something other than exhaustion and resentment. Hope, maybe? Or just desperation disguised as opportunity. Saturday came, and I called in sick to my grocery store job, something I'd never done before. I felt guilty, but this felt important. A potential escape route from my current situation. The auction was held at Safe Store Storage, a sprawling complex of orange doors and chain-link fencing. About 15 people milled around the entrance, most looking like they'd done this many times before. They carried flashlights and had an air of casual confidence I definitely lacked. A woman with a clipboard introduced herself as a facility manager and explained the rules. Each unit would be open for a 2-minute viewing from the doorway only. No entering, no touching. Bids would start at $50, cash only, payment due immediately after winning. All units must be emptied within 48 hours. The first unit rolled up to reveal stacked moving boxes, a leather couch, and what looked like exercise equipment. The bidding quickly escalated beyond my comfort zone, eventually selling for $675 to a burly guy in a Reseller Life t-shirt. The second and third units were smaller and less impressive, mostly household goods and furniture that didn't spark much interest. They went for $225 and $175 respectively. The fourth unit made my heart race. As soon as the door rolled up, I spotted several vintage-looking electronics, including what appeared to be old gaming consoles. From my late-night YouTube education, I knew these could be valuable. There were also plastic bins neatly labeled comics and trading cards, both potentially gold mines according to videos I'd watched. When bidding started, I nervously raised my hand at $50. Another bidder immediately countered with $100. I went to $150, my palms sweating around the cash in my pocket. The bidding continued, and before I knew what was happening, I committed to $800, nearly all my remaining money. Going once, going twice, Sold for $800, the manager announced, pointing at me. A mixture of elation and terror washed over me as I handed over my cash and received a padlock key in return. I now owned everything in that 10 by 10 space, for better or worse. After the auction finished, I drove my truck to the unit's entrance and began loading. The vintage electronics I'd spotted turned out to be outdated office equipment from the early 2000s, worthless. The comics boxes contained water-damaged magazines. The trading cards were incomplete sets of sports cards from the late 80s, the period known as the junk wax era, with virtually no value. Box after box revealed similar disappointments. A few decent pieces of furniture might fetch $200 total. Some tools, perhaps another $100. After accounting for gas, time, and storage of these items while I tried to sell them, I'd be lucky to recoup $500 of my $800 investment. I sat on the concrete floor of the storage unit, surrounded by my underwhelming purchase, and laughed until my eyes watered. Whether they were tears of laughter or despair, I couldn't tell. My first big swing at changing my fortune had been a bust. That night, lying on my mattress with Bob the cockroach watching from the bathroom doorway, I analyzed what had gone wrong. I'd been impulsive, emotional, and uninformed. I'd seen a few success stories online and imagined I could replicate them without any experience or knowledge. The next morning, I listed the furniture and tools on Facebook Marketplace and dragged the worthless items to the dumpster. Within a week, I'd made back $485, a $315 loss that I couldn't really afford. But something strange happened as I was processing this failure. Instead of feeling defeated, I felt educated. I'd paid $315 for a real-world lesson that no YouTube video could have taught me. I began researching in earnest, learning about valuable collectibles, how to spot quality furniture, indicators of valuable units versus junk-filled ones. For the next 2 months, I spent my rare free hours attending local storage auctions without bidding. I just watched, learned, and listened. I noticed which experienced buyers got excited about certain items. I overheard conversations about recent sales and marketplace trends. I took mental notes about which buyers specialized in what items. And as I observed, a plan began forming in my mind, a strategy that might just work if I could save enough for one more attempt. But this time, I'd be prepared. This time, I'd know exactly what I was looking for. The early October morning brought an unexpected chill to the air as I sat on a bench near safe store storage, sipping lukewarm coffee from a gas station cup. I developed a weekend routine of showing up to these auctions just to observe, taking mental notes on what types of units sparked bidding wars and which ones the professionals avoided. Today's auction wouldn't start for another hour, but I liked arriving early to watch the regulars scout the facility and exchange industry gossip. My finances had stabilized somewhat. I'd been promoted to shift supervisor at Applebee's, which came with a modest raise and slightly more predictable hours. I'd also learned to be more selective about which warehouse shifts I accepted, focusing on the higher-paying weekend ones. My savings had slowly rebuilt to about $1,250, just enough for next month's rent plus a small buffer. The park across from Safe Store had become my unofficial office for planning my next move, armed with a notebook full of observations about valuable items, pricing patterns, and buyer behaviors. I felt almost like a sports analyst studying game footage. My first $315 loss had evolved into what I now considered tuition for my real-world education. As I reviewed my notes, movement from the corner of my eye caught my attention. An older man shuffled toward a nearby trash can, carefully examining its contents before moving on to the next one. His clothes were worn but relatively clean, and he carried a backpack that had clearly seen better days. What struck me was his appearance, but his methodical approach. This wasn't random searching, but a deliberate routine. Our eyes met briefly as he passed my bench. I nodded slightly, and to my surprise, he changed course and headed toward me. "Morning," he said, his voice surprisingly clear and articulate. "You're here every weekend, waiting for the auctions." I nodded, slightly taken aback that someone had been observing me while I thought I was the observer. "You never bid, though," he continued, keeping a respectful distance from my bench. "Just watch." "I'm learning," I admitted, Had a bad experience my first time out. He chuckled, a sound like dry leaves rustling. Smart kid. Most people lose their shirt before they figure that out. There was something about his eyes. Clear blue despite the weathered face they belonged to. They held a sharpness that spoke of intelligence and, somehow, a former life very different from his current circumstances. I gestured to the empty half of my bench, surprised at myself. Want to sit? He hesitated, then accepted, leaving a careful gap between us. Up close, I could see he was probably in his 60s, with a neatly trimmed silver beard despite his otherwise disheveled appearance. Name's Henry, he offered. Alex. I replied, using my middle name out of habit developed since leaving home. You hungry, Henry? I asked, noticing how he eyed my paper bag, containing a breakfast sandwich. Always, he answered with a dignity that made me respect him immediately. I handed him my untouched second sandwich and watched as he carefully unwrapped it, taking measured bites rather than devouring it. This wasn't a man who had always lived on the streets. Thank you, he said between bites. Most people pretend not to see me. Something about that statement hit too close to home. How many times had I felt invisible in my own family? I thought of my meager apartment with its persistent cockroach problem and realized how thin the line was between my situation and Henry's. I know what that's like, I said quietly. Being invisible. Henry studied me with those perceptive blue eyes. You're too young to be this interested in storage auctions. Most kids your age are in college or working entry-level jobs, dreaming of bigger things. I gave him the abbreviated version of my story. Kicked out, working multiple jobs, looking for a way to change my trajectory. He listened without interruption or judgment. So these auctions, Henry said when I finished, gesturing towards Safe Store. You think they're your ticket out? Maybe, I admitted, or at least a way to make enough for community college. I've been studying what sells, what doesn't. I think I could be good at it with some capital and a bit of luck. Henry nodded slowly. I used to know someone who did very well with these auctions. Called himself a treasure hunter. My ears perked up. Recently? Up until a few months ago. Older Asian gentleman, always dressed in black, drove a white panel van. Very particular about which units he bid on. Sometimes he'd pay way over market for units others wouldn't touch. Other times he'd walk away from ones everyone was fighting over. Did he find valuable stuff? I asked, my interest thoroughly piqued. Henry smiled. Must have. He always gave me $20 when he saw me, sometimes more if he was in a good mood. Last time I saw him, he seemed especially happy. Said he found something that would set him up for years. What happened to him? I asked. Henry shrugged. Don't know. Haven't seen him in about 3 months. He was clockwork regular before that. Every third Thursday like a paycheck. A small flutter of excitement stirred in my chest. Do you know which unit was his? Not for certain, Henry said, rubbing his weathered chin thoughtfully. But I remember something that might help. He stared thoughtfully into the distance before speaking again. I remember his unit number, actually, Henry said, his eyes lighting up with the memory. For 72. Noticed it on his key tag one day when we were talking. He was just holding it in his hand, spinning it around his finger. Those numbers stuck in my head because they were the last digits of my old Chevy's license plate back when I had a car. Funny how the mind works. You're sure it was 472? I asked. Try to keep my voice casual. Positive. Henry nodded firmly. Some numbers just stick with you, you know? I processed this new information, trying not to show my excitement. Why tell me this? Henry finished his sandwich and carefully folded the wrapper before answering. Because you bought me breakfast without making me feel like charity. And because you're watching and learning instead of rushing in. Smart people deserve breaks sometimes. We sat in companionable silence for a few minutes before Henry stood up. One more thing. I overheard the manager yesterday saying Unit 472 is going up for auction next Thursday. 3 months of non-payment. My heart skipped a beat. This Thursday? Henry nodded. Good luck, kid. Hope it helps. As he walked away, I called after him. I'll be here next Saturday, same time, with breakfast. He raised a hand in acknowledgement, without looking back. For the rest of the day, that unit number, 472, burned in my mind. I couldn't focus on the auction happening in front of me, my thoughts racing with possibilities. What if this really was the treasure hunter's unit? What if he left behind whatever valuable find had made him so happy the last time Henry saw him? But the rational part of my brain fought back. This could be nothing, just a random key to a random unit containing nothing but abandoned household goods. Or worse, it could be a completely different kind of key, not for a storage unit at all. When I got home that evening, Bob the cockroach greeted me from his usual spot near the sink. "What do you think, Bob? Should I risk it?" The insect's antennae twitched, which I chose to interpret as encouragement. I spent all week researching Unit 472. I casually asked the facility manager about upcoming auctions, confirming that several units, including 472, would indeed be up for bid on Thursday due to non-payment. I tried to sound nonchalant when asking if they knew anything about the previous renter. Some older guy, kept to himself, was all I got. Paid cash, never late until recently. Thursday morning arrived, and I called in sick to all 3 jobs, something I'd never done before. If I lost even one of those positions, my precarious financial situation would collapse. But something told me this was a risk worth taking. As I parked at Safe Store, I checked my bank account one more time. $1,250.16. Exactly enough for rent plus $600.16 for bidding. This was incredibly foolish. If I spent this money and found nothing of value, I'd be on the street within a month. The turnout for this auction was smaller than usual. Just 7 people, including myself. Unit 472 was the third one up. When the manager rolled up the door, my heart sank a little. The 10 by 15 space looked unremarkable. Some furniture covered in tarps. Cardboard boxes stacked neatly. A few plastic totes. Nothing that screamed treasure to the untrained eye. But then I noticed something the others might have missed. The boxes were labeled in a language that appeared to be Chinese or Japanese, and they were arranged with incredible precision, not haphazardly like most abandoned units. This matched what Henry had said about the meticulous Asian gentleman. Bidding started at $100. One of the regulars, a middle-aged woman who specialized in furniture, opened. I countered with $150, trying to keep my voice steady. Another bidder went to $200. The price climbed steadily, but not dramatically. $250, $300, $350. When it hit $500, 3 bidders dropped out, leaving just me and a guy I recognized as a regular who dealt in electronics. At $600, he hesitated before bidding $650. This was it, my limit exactly. If I went higher, I wouldn't make rent. $700, I heard myself say, my mouth apparently making decisions without consulting my brain. The electronics dealer shook his head and walked away. The facility manager looked at me expectantly. $700 going once, twice sold. As I handed over my credit card, watching the terminal process the payment that left me with exactly $550.16 in my account, $100 short of my rent. A feeling of simultaneous terror and exhilaration washed over me. An inner sense, almost like a whisper in my ear, had pushed me to confirm that bid. I was now the owner of Unit 472, and everything inside it would either change my life or leave me homeless. The storage facility manager handed me the key to Unit 472, and for a brief moment, I felt like I might throw up. $700. Gone. My rent money, mostly gone. If this gamble didn't pay off, I'd be joining Henry on the streets within weeks. You have 48 hours to clear everything out, the manager reminded me before walking away. The small crowd had already moved on to the next unit, leaving me alone with my purchase. I stood in front of the rolled-up door, key in hand, experiencing what must be similar to how gamblers feel after placing their entire life savings on a single roulette number. That peculiar mix of dread and anticipation, knowing your entire future hinges on luck. With a deep breath, I slid the key into the padlock. It turned smoothly and the lock popped open. This was it, the moment of truth. I rolled up the door and stepped inside. The musty smell of cardboard and dust greeted me, along with a faint scent of something I couldn't quite identify. Maybe incense? The space was impeccably organized, just as I had glimpsed during the brief viewing. Boxes were stacked with mathematical precision, each labeled in what looked like Chinese characters. Furniture was covered with clean tarps, secured with bungee cords. Even the stacking plastic totes were arranged by size and color. But my initial excitement began to fade as I investigated further. The furniture, once uncovered, revealed itself to be decent but unremarkable. A small dining set, a couple of end tables, a floor lamp. Nothing antique or particularly valuable. The first few boxes contained household items. Dishes, small appliances, tools. Again, usable but not valuable. My heart sank with each open box. I'd gambled everything on Henry's tip about a treasure hunter, and so far, I found nothing but normal household goods. In the back corner, I discovered what looked like a metal detector, but it was an older model with a cracked display. Next to it was a box containing various tools for metal detecting and artifact cleaning. At least these items might fetch something from a hobbyist. 2 hours into my exploration, sweat sticking my t-shirt to my back, I stood in the middle of the unit surrounded by open boxes and plastic tubs. Despair washed over me as I calculated the resale value. Maybe $1,500 total, if I was lucky. Enough to recoup my $700 investment and make rent, but hardly the life-changing treasure I'd hoped for. I couldn't help but wonder if Henry had been mistaken, or if the treasure hunter had cleared out his valuable finds before abandoning the unit. Maybe the successful Asian gentleman had simply moved away or found a better storage facility. The only area I hadn't yet examined was a stack of plastic totes in the far corner. With diminishing hope, I pulled down the top one and popped open the lid. More household items. Winter clothing, blankets, a small space heater. The second tote contained books, mostly in Chinese with a few in English about American history and numismatics, coin collecting. This piqued my interest slightly, given what Henry had told me about the man being a treasure hunter. The third tote down, smaller than the others, was surprisingly heavy for its size. Inside were more books, some maps marked with strange annotations, and tucked in the corner, a wooden box about the size of a thick hardcover novel. The box was simple but beautiful, made of dark with no external decorations or markings. When I picked it up, something shifted inside. My pulse quickened as I carefully opened the hinge lid. Inside, nestled in velvet, were 3 round objects wrapped individually in soft cloth, along with a stack of old letters tied with twine. The letters were written in Chinese, except for dates at the top, ranging from 1988 to 2019. Family correspondence, perhaps? I set the letters aside gently and picked up one of the cloth-wrapped objects. Carefully unwrapping it revealed a coin, silver, about the size of a $50, but obviously old. Even with my limited knowledge, I could tell this wasn't just spare change. The coin featured a stern-looking profile of a man with the date 1878 below it. The reverse showed an eagle with spread wings. After a quick internet search on my phone, I identified it as a Morgan silver dollar, a common collector's item. In excellent condition like this one, it might be worth $1,000 to $2,000. My heart rate accelerated. One coin potentially worth up to $2,000? This was already a game changer. I carefully rewrapped the first coin and moved the second. The second coin was similar to the first, another Morgan silver dollar, but from 1893. Another search revealed this was from the San Francisco Mint and considered more rare, potentially worth $3,000 to $4,000 in this condition. My hands were shaking slightly as I reached for the third wrapped object. If the pattern held, this could be another valuable coin. The unit was already proving profitable, but something told me this third coin might be different. This coin was slightly larger than the others and felt heavier in my palm. As I unwrapped it, my breath caught in my throat. Unlike the previous coins with their relatively familiar designs, this one featured a profile of a woman with flowing hair. The date beneath the profile read 1794. In the dim light of the storage unit, I stared at the coin, a strange feeling washing over me. Even with zero expertise in coins, something told me this was extraordinary. The eagle on the reverse side looked different from modern coins. Smaller, more delicate. With trembling fingers, I searched 1794 silver coin eagle flowing hair on my phone. The results made my knees buckle. I actually had to sit down on a nearby box. According to multiple sources, I was holding a flowing hair silver dollar from 1794, one of the first silver dollars ever minted in the United States. Only about 1,700 were originally produced, and experts estimated that just 120 to 130 survived in any condition. And the value? Recent auction sales showed these coins selling for millions, yes, millions of dollars, depending on condition. A particularly well-preserved specimen had sold for over $10 million in 2013, making it one of the most valuable coins in existence. I must have sat there for 20 minutes, just staring at the coin in my hand, afraid to move or even breathe too hard. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like me. People who got kicked out of their homes, who worked 3 jobs just to afford an apartment with roaches, who had never caught a break in their lives. Yet there it was, resting in my palm, potentially enough money to change everything. After carefully rewrapping the coin and securing the wooden box, I loaded my truck with just a plastic tote containing the box and a few personal items that might help establish provenance. Everything else could wait. This needed to be verified immediately. The next morning, I called in sick again. My managers were definitely getting suspicious, and researched reputable coin dealers and appraisers. I needed someone with specific expertise in early American coins, preferably with auction house connections. I found Harrington & Sons, a 4th-generation numismatic firm with offices in Philadelphia. They specialize in rare American coins and work with major auction houses. Their website mentioned that senior partner William Harrington was one of only a dozen certified experts in 18th century American coinage. The earliest appointment I could get was 3 days away. Those were the longest 3 days of my life. I barely slept. The wooden box stayed with me constantly, either in my backpack during the day or under my pillow at night. Bob the cockroach seemed to sense my anxiety, keeping a respectful distance from my bed for once. When the day finally arrived, I dressed in the nicest clothes I owned, which wasn't saying much, and drove the 2 hours to Philadelphia. The wooden box secured in a small fireproof safe I'd purchased specifically for this purpose. Harrington & Sons occupied the top floor of a historic building in Center City. The reception area was all dark wood and burgundy leather, with museum-quality display, cases showing coins throughout American history. I felt wildly out of place, but the receptionist treated me professionally when I explained I had an appointment. Mr. Harrington was a tall, slender man in his 60s with wire-rimmed glasses and neatly trimmed silver hair. His office was even more impressive than the reception area, with certificates and historical photographs covering the walls. He greeted me with a firm handshake and invited me to sit. When I explained that I believed I had an 1794 flowing hair dollar, he maintained a professional poker face, but I noticed a slight raise of his eyebrows. He asked about provenance, how I'd acquired it. I explained about the storage unit auction, omitting Henry and the strange circumstances. Technically, the contents were legally mine, but I wanted to keep the story simple. Finally, the moment arrived. I placed a fireproof box on his desk, unlocked it, and carefully handed him the cloth-wrapped coin. The room seemed to hold its breath as he unwrapped it with gloved hands. The next few minutes were surreal. Mr. Harrington examined the coin under various lights and magnification levels, occasionally making notes. He weighed it, measured it, and compared it to references in books he pulled from his shelves, all without saying a word. Finally, he looked up at me, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes betraying excitement. This appears to be an authentic 1794 flowing hair silver dollar, and in remarkably good condition for its age. BB, one variety, which is the most desirable. If you're interested in selling, I'd like to have our photography team document it properly and prepare it for possible auction. My voice seemed to come from somewhere outside my body. What do you think it might be worth? He removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Given the condition and provenance, I would estimate a hammer price between $7 and $8 million, possibly more with the right bidders in the room. The world tilted sideways for a moment. $7 to $8 million. From a $700 investment in a storage unit, from a chance conversation with a homeless man on a park bench. Mr. Harrington continued talking about authentication processes, auction schedules, and commission rates, but his words washed over me in waves. All I could think about was a number, $8 million. Enough to change everything. Enough to never worry about rent again. Enough for college, a real home, maybe even helping Henry. 3 months later, I stood in the back of a prestigious auction house in New York City, watching as bidders from around the world competed for my coin. The starting price was $5 million, but it quickly escalated. $6 million, $7 million, $7.5. When a hammer finally fell at $8 million, a record for that particular variety of the $1,794, I felt strangely calm. The reality was still too enormous to fully comprehend. It's been 2 years since that life-changing auction. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night and check my bank account on my phone just to make sure it wasn't all some elaborate dream. After taxes and the auction house commission, I walked away with just over $6.4 million. More money than I could have imagined in my previous life. The first thing I did was pay off my debts, all $1,250 of them. Funny how a sum that once seemed insurmountable now felt like pocket change. I bought a modest but beautiful 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood outside of town. Nothing flashy or ostentatious. Just solid, comfortable, and most importantly, roach-free. No offense to Bob, but we needed to part ways. I also bought a reliable Toyota 4Runner. Not a luxury vehicle or a sports car, though I could have afforded either. Just something dependable that wouldn't break down every other week, like my old Ford pickup. Old habits die hard, I guess. Growing up as a less favored son taught me that security matters more than showing off. The majority of my windfall went into investments, a diversified portfolio of stocks, bonds, and real estate, as recommended by the financial advisors I hired. But I also set aside a significant portion for a new venture, a legitimate treasure hunting business. Lost and Found Acquisitions now employs 8 people who research, attend, and bid on storage auctions across 3 states. We've developed a reputation for fair dealings and occasional spectacular finds. Nothing approaching the scale of the flowing-haired dollar, of course, but enough interesting discoveries to keep the business profitable and featured in several trade magazines. I was settling into my new life, finding a comfortable rhythm between work and personal time, when the past came knocking, literally. It was a Sunday afternoon in May when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I was surprised to see my parents and brother standing on my porch. My mother looked older, my father stiffer, and Michael looked worried. They'd tracked me down through a distant cousin I'd stayed in contact with. News of my business success had apparently made it back to them, though they clearly didn't know the full extent of my financial situation. I invited them in, more out of curiosity than any desire for reconciliation. The awkward small talk lasted precisely 7 minutes before they got to the real reason for their visit. Michael's investment firm had collapsed, something about mismanagement and an SEC investigation. Their second mortgage was underwater, and retirement savings had been decimated by poor investments. They needed money, a lot of it. My father framed it as a family obligation. My mother appealed to my sense of gratitude for the sacrifices they'd made raising me. Michael mostly stared at his shoes, occasionally mumbling about temporary setbacks and future repayment. As they talked, something strange happened. I felt nothing, no anger, no resentment, not even satisfaction at their reversal of fortune, just a profound sense of disconnect, as if they were characters in a movie I'd seen long ago. When they finished explaining how much they needed, a surprisingly specific $380,000, my mother added the clincher. If you can't help your family in their time of need, then maybe you're not really part of this family anymore. I almost laughed at the irony. 3 years earlier, they'd thrown me out for wanting the same educational opportunities they'd given my brother. Now they were threatening to disown me again if I didn't bail them out. I haven't been part of your family since the night you kicked me out, I said quietly. I made it on my own. Michael can do the same. My father's face reddened. After everything we did for you, What exactly did you do for me? I interrupted. You made it clear I wasn't worth investing in. You were right in one way. It taught me self-reliance. I suggest Michael learn the same lesson. They left in a huff of indignation and slammed doors. I should have felt something, vindication, perhaps, or at least closure. Instead, I just felt empty and maybe a little sad for all of us. Some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. But that night, as I sat alone in my living room staring at the family photo, I kept despite everything, something shifted inside me. The anger that had been my companion for so long had transformed into something else. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. I realized that holding on to resentment was only keeping me tethered to the past I'd worked so hard to escape. The next morning, I called my father and arranged to meet him alone at a coffee shop. His surprise was evident when I slid an envelope across the table containing a cashier's check for exactly $380,000. Why? He asked, his voice lacking its usual certainty. Not because I owe you anything, I explained, and not because you deserve it, but because I don't want to be the kind of person who turns away family in need, even when they turn away from me. That would make me too much like you. His face registered the blow, but he nodded slowly. This comes with conditions. I continued. This is a one-time thing. I'm not your personal bank. And moving forward, we maintain distance. No sudden family reunions. No pretending the past didn't happen. If we ever rebuild a relationship, it'll be slowly, on equal footing and with respect. As he left with the envelope, I felt an unexpected lightness. By helping them while maintaining my boundaries, I'd freed myself from both bitterness and manipulation. The money meant little to me now, but the freedom from resentment was priceless. My thoughts turned to Henry. After that initial auction success, finding him had been my top priority, but he'd vanished. The day after receiving my auction proceeds, I returned to our bench with breakfast and coffee, only to find it empty. Day after day, I checked the park, local shelters, and soup kitchens. I left my contact information with outreach workers and even hired a private investigator, all without success. For nearly 2 years, I kept searching. Whenever I traveled to neighboring cities for business, I'd visit their homeless services centers with Henry's photo. I created a small foundation specifically focused on helping homeless veterans, guessing from things Henry had mentioned that he might have served, hoping he might connect with it. Despite all these efforts, Henry seemed to have disappeared. Then, one rainy Tuesday afternoon, while driving through an unfamiliar part of town looking at a potential property investment, I spotted a figure under a highway overpass. Something about the methodical way he was organizing his small camp caught my eye. I pulled over, hardly daring to hope. When I approached and saw those familiar blue eyes, I could barely contain my emotion. Henry looked thinner, his beard longer, but his dignity remained intact. He'd set up a small camp hidden from casual view, neat and organized despite the circumstances. When he recognized me, he smiled without a hint of resentment for my long absence. "The storage unit kid," he said. "Figured you either struck out or struck it rich. Guessing it's the latter from those new shoes." I told him everything, the coin, the auction, my new business. He listened with the same calm attention he'd shown during our first meeting, nodding occasionally but never interrupting. When I finished, I made him an offer, an apartment, help getting identification, and any needed medical care, and a job at my company if he wanted it. No strings attached. Henry stared at me for a long moment. "Why? You don't owe me anything." "That's not true," I said. "Your information changed my life. But even if it hadn't, even if that unit had been full of nothing but trash, I'd still want to help because someone should have helped you long before now." He considered this, then nodded once. "I accept, but there's something you should know about me." As it turned out, Henry wasn't always homeless. 10 years ago, he'd been Henry Chun, successful import-export business owner with offices in San Francisco and Shanghai. A series of devastating events, a market crash, a betrayal by his business partner, and a bitter divorce had left him bankrupt and eventually homeless. What he hadn't lost was his knowledge of international business and fluency in Mandarin and Cantonese. Once he got back on his feet, proper ID, a place to live, appropriate clothing. He became an invaluable asset to my company. His insights into Asian markets and collectibles opened doors I didn't even know existed. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before Henry's business acumen revealed itself, I made good on another promise. On the day he moved into his new apartment, I handed him an envelope containing papers for a trust fund I'd established in his name. $1 million, professionally managed, with monthly distributions to ensure he'd never be homeless again. When he saw the amount, he tried to refuse. I insisted this wasn't charity, but fair compensation for information that had earned me over 6 times that amount. Eventually, he accepted with a dignity that made me respect him even more. With my business thriving and my relationship with Henry evolving from benefactor to genuine friendship and business partnership, I found myself thinking about other aspects of life I'd neglected, specifically relationships. I met Sarah at a charity auction my company sponsored for homeless services. She ran the nonprofit organization, receiving the proceeds. Smart, compassionate, and refreshingly direct, she wasn't impressed by my financial success, but was interested in how I used it. Our first date was volunteering at a shelter together. Our 10th was a weekend in wine country. 6 months later, I proposed on the same park bench where I'd first met Henry. We were married in a small ceremony with just close friends, Henry as my best man. Life settled into a rhythm I'd never thought possible for someone like me. My business continued to grow, now with international connections, thanks to Henry's expertise. Sarah's nonprofit expanded with my financial backing, but her vision at the helm. We bought a house with a sprawling backyard and a terrace overlooking the city. Some evenings, Sarah and I sit on that terrace watching the sunset. On one such evening, reflecting on the journey from my parents' driveway to this moment, I shared a thought that had been forming for months. You know what's strange? If my parents hadn't kicked me out, if they'd supported me like they did Michael, I'd probably be finishing some mid-level degree and heading for a corporate job I hated. All of this, meeting Henry, finding that coin, meeting you, none of it would have happened. Sarah, always more spiritually inclined than me, smiled. There's a saying, the universe conspires to help those who help others. You showed kindness to a stranger when you had nothing yourself. Everything flowed from that moment. Maybe she's right. Maybe there's some cosmic accounting system where good deeds eventually return multiplied. Or maybe life is just random chance, and I happen to get lucky after a lifetime of bad breaks. Either way, I've learned that wealth isn't just about money. It's about connections, purpose, and finding your place in the world. I went from being invisible in my own family to building a new kind of family, one bound by choice rather than blood. I've also learned that success is hollow, if not shared. The $1 million I gave Henry changed his life, but his friendship has enriched mine beyond measure. The work Sarah and I do with homelessness prevention has helped hundreds of people, but it's also given us both a purpose larger than ourselves. Tonight, gazing at the stars from our terrace, I'm reminded of something my 5th grade teacher used to say. We make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give. My story isn't really about finding a rare coin worth millions. It's about discovering that a single moment of human connection can change the trajectory of entire lives, not just mine, but rippling outward to touch countless others. And that, I've found, is the real treasure.